All right, so correlations in Stata. As with any of these other hypothesis tests we've met, you can also run them in Stata and other statistical programs and get the same information out. So as a reminder, using the example that we just had, our null hypothesis for this significance test would be that the correlation between marijuana use and confidence is 0 in the population, so there's no relationship between these things. And the alternative hypothesis would be that there is a relationship between these things, so the correlation is not 0. The Stata output looks like this, so this is, as you can see, the simplest of all of them. Not too much going on here, but what we have here is the correlation, and that's the number that's found where you're in the row for weed and the column for A class, so it's where those two things intersect. And then we have the p-value right there, so the number beneath it is the p-value. So this is what we saw before, a correlation, if you round that, it's about 0.11, and then the p-value is 0.44. So again, you'd interpret that as saying that if the null hypothesis is true, there's a 44% chance we would have seen a correlation as big as 0.11 or bigger in a sample. So we fail to reject the null hypothesis that these things have a 0 correlation. So we don't have any evidence against the idea that they're not correlated in the population. So same interpretation, again, kind of less going on in this one than in most of them, but you will possibly need to know that for the project that I'm going to describe in a minute. Before I do that, I'm going to make a quick note about statistics like the ones we've been talking about, so anything where you're looking at two variables and how they're related. So this includes the t-tests and ANOVA and chi-square tests and correlation. Anything where you're looking at two variables and you're seeing, you know, are the means different across different values of another variable, or is there an association between the variables in the sense that we've been talking about today? And what you can take away from these tests is that an association between the variables means that they are related. And you could predict values of one from the other, and you can see differences across, you know, variable values or whatever it is that your specific hypothesis test is telling you. The thing that they don't tell you is whether one variable actually causes the other one. So you've possibly heard the phrase that correlation is not causation before, but this is a really, really important takeaway when talking about hypothesis tests. So hypothesis tests are useful because they can tell you what's going on in the population, but there are things that they cannot tell you as well. And as a fun example of why correlation is not causation, I want you to just take a look at this nice graph here. This is real data, and this shows the correlation between the number of people who drowned by falling in a pool and the number of films that Nicolas Cage appeared in. These two things are pretty highly correlated, especially, you know, for being what they are. But the thing to note here is that there's not really a relationship between these things, right? They just happen to be correlated, but you can't say that people died from falling into a pool because Nicolas Cage made a lot of films in a year. And so this is also sort of a preview for next week, where we're going to talk about some of the limitations of what we can do with hypothesis testing, as well as, even more importantly, things to look out for when you're interpreting statistics that you see in the news or on social media or whatever, because statistics get mangled and misused all the time, and there are a couple of sort of quick and easy things that you can be on the lookout for to be a good consumer of statistical information in the world. All right, but with that, I am now going to conclude my lecture and talk about this applied data analysis project that's going to be due in a couple of weeks. So your goal in this project, and what the steps of the project will walk you through, is to use data from something called the General Social Survey to answer a research question. And some information about the General Social Survey is included on the assignment sheet that's on Blackboard as well. So don't feel like you need to take notes right now. But briefly, the General Social Survey is a big nationwide survey that's conducted every other year by an institution that does research, and it's a public opinion survey. So just like the class survey, it's a survey in which people are asked to answer questions about their attitudes and experiences. And in fact, some of the questions from the class survey I pulled right off of the General Social Survey. It is also a nationally representative survey of the United States. So they use sampling procedures that mean that when you look at data from this survey, you can generalize it to the United States as a whole. So anything you learn from this survey can be used to learn about sort of what's going on in the country as a whole. And so our goal in this class, and our goal with this project, is going to be to take what we've learned and then use data from this survey to answer a research question about, the actual United States. And so whatever you take away from this project, you can actually take away as sort of information about what's going on. And so there are a couple of different research question options that you can choose for this project. And the options I have listed here, option 1 is, do men and women have the same amount of trust in American courts? Option 2 is, do white, black, and people who identify as other race have the same amount of trust in American courts? Option number 3 is there a relationship between years of education and trust in American courts? And then option 4 is there a relationship between supporting police use of force and supporting the death penalty? So as you can see, each of these questions involves criminal justice in some way. These are taken from survey questions that happen to be included in the 2018 GSS, which is the most recent one. If you are feeling particularly fired up about some other research question that you would like to use the GSS to learn about, let me know. I'm also open to alternatives to these 4 questions. But these are the ones that I just selected out of the possible variables and possible questions that could be answered in the general social survey. So with this project, what I'm going to ask you to do is pick one of these 4 options, so whichever one looks most interesting to you, and then use data from the GSS in the form of Stata output like we've been seeing throughout the semester to answer a question, or to answer the research question that you chose. And so whatever answer you come up with, because the general social survey is nationally representative, will tell you something about those variables that you're looking at in the US population as a whole. What I want from you will be a short report based on your interpretation of the analyses, which include descriptive statistics and hypothesis tests. And the report should include the sections that I'm about to go through here. The first part is the research question. So in the report, I want you to briefly describe the research question that you selected and tell me how you think the variables might be related. So if you chose gender and trust in courts, tell me whether you think men or women will have more trust in courts, or whether you think it'll be exactly the same. So I'm not looking for you to do any research here, just for any of these questions, just based on your own knowledge and experiences or things you've done in other classes, just give me some explanation for what you think might be the case. The next part of the report will deal with the variables. So in each of those research questions, there are 2 main variables, and I want you to describe those variables. And particularly, I want you to tell me what the variable attributes are and how they are coded. This information will be given to you as well. When you poke around in the project folder, you'll see there are sheets that correspond to each of the research questions. And if you download them, they'll give you information about the variables. They will give you descriptive statistics for the variables, and they will give you the results of whichever hypothesis test is most appropriate for answering the question. So a little bit of it's going to be on you to figure out what the hypothesis test is and what's going on in it, but it's going to be all things you've seen before. But again, so based on these sheets with the information about variables, just tell me how in the sheet, in the GSS, the variables are coded and what they look like. Then I also want you to tell me which one you think is the independent variable and which one you think is the dependent variable. So of the variables you're looking at, which one do you think would be the cause of a relationship, or which one do you think would be the effect in the relationship? And then also tell me what the level of measurement is for both of your variables. So just as you can see here, this project is really spanning the whole semester. So the idea is you're going to incorporate what you've learned throughout the semester and use it to complete this project. The next part of the short report will be about descriptive statistics. So in those sheets that are going to be on Canvas, and I might have said Blackboard before, but I mean Canvas. So in those sheets that are going to be on Canvas, you will find Stata output that shows descriptive statistics for the variables in your sample. If you have variables that are nominal or ordinal level, I want you to talk about what you see in the frequency distributions and describe the relative frequencies for each of the categories. So what percentage of your sample, gave each response. That's what I'm looking for there if you have a nominal or ordinal level variable. For interval and ratio level variables, or variables that are numerical, I want you to describe the mean and standard deviation for your variables. And for all these, I want you to tell me what it means in words. So tell me about how these variables look in this particular sample that you're going to see information from. The next part of the short report should tell me about inferential statistics. And specifically, you can answer your research question using the appropriate hypothesis test. And so when you download the sheet that gives you the information about that you'll need to do this for your specific research question, like I said, you'll see information about the variables, you'll see information about descriptive statistics for whichever kind of variables you have, and you will also see the output for a hypothesis test. Each of the research questions that you saw listed there uses a different hypothesis test. So you can go in and you can figure out which hypothesis test you're looking at, and then describe it to me in the report. Specifically, tell me which one you're using, tell me what your null and alternative hypotheses are, tell me what the test statistic is. So depending on your hypothesis test, you're going to have a value for t, a value for f, a value for chi-squared, or a value for r. And then tell me what the p-value is based on your hypothesis test. You should then use this information to decide whether to reject the null hypothesis. And finally, and most importantly, tell me what that actually tells you about what's going on in the United States population. So you have information in your sample that you'll describe in descriptive statistics, and then you'll use that information in your sample along with the hypothesis test results to tell me about what is likely to be true in the United States population as a whole. Finally, in the report, I want you to briefly describe limitations of your hypothesis test. So we're going to discuss some limitations of hypothesis testing next week, and I want you to just describe one of those and how it applies to your results. So, in other words, we'll get into that next week, but you should have a little thing at the end about limitations to what you would conclude from this hypothesis test. And then some general points about what I'm looking for in the report. Should be about 2 to 4 pages double spaced. You can copy and paste the Stata output into the report as you describe it, or not. That's sort of stylistic and up to you. But I do want you to use separate headings for each section. So for each of these sections that are listed here, I want a separate heading. So, headings like descriptive statistics, inferential statistics, limitations. And then for each one, you can answer it fully in 1 or 2 paragraphs. So it'll be like heading, paragraph, heading, paragraph, heading, maybe 2 paragraphs. And that's what it should look like. So don't give me like one giant paragraph. Don't give me a full essay with flourishes and stuff. I want this to be a very just straightforward technical report. You can find a sheet that describes the assignment on Canvas. So it says everything I've said here, has some information about the GSS, has all the questions listed. You should use that as your main guide for completing the project. And then you can also find information about the variables, the descriptive statistics, and the hypothesis test results for your specific research question on Canvas as well. So all the stuff on Canvas is in a folder called Applied Data Analysis Project. It should be at the top of the page now. And you can find that main assignment sheet that tells you about the guidelines, and then a sheet that gives you your variable information, your descriptive statistics, and your inferential statistics for your specific research question. And in that folder also there will be a Dropbox to finish the assignment. So again, this thing is going to be due Wednesday, May 12th, so that's during finals week, and it'll be worth 50 points. Finally, as always, if you have questions, feel free to contact me. in my experience doing similar things in classes so far, for some people this will make perfect sense. For some people it'll take a little while to just sort of think about doing a report in this way and incorporating statistics in that way. And if you want to run anything by me, or if you have any questions about what you're doing or what kind of hypothesis test you're looking at, please feel free to reach out. That's what my job is, and I like to help you when I can. So otherwise, have a great week, and I will see you next week.